Hi, welcome to this lecture. Our main aim now is to learn how can we modify the transparency that is mapped to a certain variable using one of scale layer function. Now, let's come in here. For demonstration purposes also, we're going to come in here and say empty cars. Okay, so and if we come in here, we want this. Okay, now let's say we try and map the transparency to this numeric variable. And let us say also we specify the color to be, let's say blue. And if you run this, so here you can see that the transparency is now mapped to this variable horsepower. So the higher the horsepower, the more visible or the more transparent the points are going to be. Let us also come in here and add and say the size to be 3 so that we can be able to see what we're talking about. Okay, so now we have been modified the size of these points, and we now want to focus on the transparency that is mapped to this continuous variable. Okay, so the first thing that we want to do is we want to come in here and now say scale underscore. Remember, it's alpha. Try to move this a little bit. Remember, it's alpha, then continuous, right? Now, what we want to do is we want to change the name to horsepower. And if you run this, you observe we have managed to change the name. Now, what about the brakes? The brakes also, they ensure that whatever that we label in the legend represents certain points that we pass into a numeric vector. So if we come in here and we say brakes, and then we pass in this, and we say 125, 200, and we say 300. So if we run this, so we can see now we only have 125, 200, then it's 300. Okay, also we have another argument which is the limits. Okay, now what you should note is that when we specify limit, we are saying we only want to look at those cars that has the horsepower that is between 100 and 250. Okay, so if we come in here and we say limits, and then we pass in 100 and 350, and if you run this, now we only want to look at those cars that has this horsepower, that has the horsepower between 100 and 350. So we can see that this has arranged this with an increasing horsepower. So the more the horsepower, the more transparent that point is going to be. So that is how you can use the limit argument. Now, we also have range. Okay, so the range of transparency of points in this case is modified using the range argument. So in this case, we have to specify a lower and upper limit. Okay, so let us see, what do we mean? Remember, we can also control the transparency of the points. And in order to do that, we can come in here. I'm going to remove this, and I'm going to say, now we want the transparency of the points to lie, let's say 0.4 to 0.8, and let's run this. You can see now that the transparency will lie between 0.4 and 0.8. Okay, so it's the same thing as in the size. So it controls the size of points. However, in this case, we are controlling the transparency of the points. Okay, I hope that makes sense. Remember, when we were modifying the size, we also use the range function, which specifies that the size of these points should lie between certain values. But now we are controlling the transparency. So we are saying the transparency of the points will lie between 0.4 and 0.8. We have also seen that we can also modify the labels. So now let's come in here and say, for example, I'm going to specify breaks and say I'm interested in 100, 200, 300. Now let me come in here and modify the labels, and I'm gonna come and say this here is 100, and then we're gonna come and say this is 200 horsepower, and then we're gonna come and say this is 300 in horsepower. And if you run this, you observe that we have managed to modify the labels with labels arguments. We want to shift our focus and try to learn how can we modify the title, the label, as well as the bars. Okay, because what you notice here is that we've been using the scale family of functions. Okay, now we want to use the guide argument. Okay, so in the next lecture, we're going to use that argument in order to try and learn how can we modify the title, the labels, as well as the bars. Okay, that is what we'll focus on going forward.